Trapped. A story of claustrophobia. The elevator lurched to a halt. The lights flickered. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She was trapped. The air, once normal, now seemed thin, suffocating. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to engulf her. Sarah had always feared enclosed spaces. Elevators, closets, even crowded rooms could trigger a wave of paralyzing anxiety. But this time felt different, more intense. She was alone, suspended between floors, her fear spiraling out of control. Gasping for breath, Sarah remembered a technique her therapist had taught her. Controlled breathing. Slowly, deliberately, she inhaled, counting each second. Then she exhaled, releasing the tension with each breath. Her racing heart gradually slowed. The panic began to recede. It took time, but Sarah regained control. When the doors finally opened, she emerged shaken but triumphant. Fear. It's a primal emotion, hardwired into our brains since the dawn of humanity. Imagine our ancestors, navigating a world teeming with predators and danger. Fear was their alarm system, a surge of adrenaline that propelled them to fight or flee, ensuring their survival. This ancient survival mechanism is still very much active within us today. It's what makes us slam on the brakes when a car cuts us off. But like a vigilant guard dog, fear can sometimes become overprotective, barking at shadows and perceived threats. In the modern world, we rarely encounter saber-toothed tigers or hostile tribes. Yet our fear response remains, often triggered by situations that pose no real danger. To understand how fear can become a hindrance, we need to delve into the intricate workings of the brain. At the heart of our fear response lies the amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure nestled deep within the brain. Think of it as the brain's alarm system. When we encounter a potential threat, our senses send signals to the thalamus, which acts as a relay station. The thalamus then routes these signals to the amygdala for rapid processing. This pathway, known as the low road, bypasses the thinking part of the brain, the cortex, allowing for an immediate, instinctive response. This is why we react to perceived danger before we even have time to think. The amygdala receives the signal, interprets it as a threat, and triggers the release of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, preparing the body for fight or flight. Our heart rate and breathing accelerate, muscles tense, and we become hyper-alert, ready to respond. Phobias, those intense and often irrational fears, represent a malfunctioning of our fear response. They arise when the brain's fear circuitry becomes overactive, associating a harmless object or situation with extreme danger. Imagine a child who is bitten by a dog. The experience, traumatic in itself, creates a powerful association between dogs and pain in the child's mind. This association becomes ingrained in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Later in life, even the sight of a dog, regardless of its breed or demeanor, can trigger an intense fear response in the individual. This process, known as classical conditioning, explains how phobias can develop from a single negative experience. The brain, in its attempt to protect us, overgeneralizes the threat, extending the fear response to all stimuli even remotely similar to the original source of fear. Phobias can also develop through observational learning. Section 5. Facing down the monster. Exposure therapy and beyond. For those grappling with phobias, the good news is that fear is a learned response, and like any learned behavior, it can be unlearned. Exposure therapy, a cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, stands as a beacon of hope for those seeking to overcome their fears. The premise of exposure therapy is elegantly simple, gradual, and repeated exposure to the feared object or situation while providing support and teaching coping mechanisms. Imagine someone with a fear of flying. Exposure therapy might involve starting with looking at pictures of airplanes, then watching videos, visiting an airport, and eventually taking a short flight. Each step of the way, the individual confronts their fear in a safe and controlled environment, gradually desensitizing themselves to the trigger. This process helps to rewire the brain's fear circuitry, weakening the association between the feared object and the fear response. Beyond exposure therapy, other psychological techniques like cognitive restructuring play a crucial role in overcoming fears. Section 6. Taming the Beast Within. Mindfulness and gradual exposure. While professional help is invaluable, there are steps we can take on our own to manage and overcome our fears. Mindfulness, the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment, has emerged as a powerful tool in the fight against fear. When fear strikes, our minds often race into the future, imagining worst-case scenarios. Mindfulness helps to anchor us to the present, focusing our attention on our breath, our senses, and the reality of the situation. By observing our thoughts and feelings without judgment, we create a space between ourselves and our fear, diminishing its power over us. Gradual exposure, practiced in everyday life, complements mindfulness beautifully. Start by identifying small, manageable steps you can take to confront your fear. If you're afraid of public speaking, for instance, begin by practicing in front of a mirror, then with a trusted friend, and gradually work your way up to larger audiences. Section 7. You are braver than you think. A call to courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. It's the willingness to face our fears, even when our instincts tell us to run and hide. It's in those moments of confronting our fears that we discover our true strength and resilience. Remember, fear is a natural human emotion, a part of what makes us human. It's okay to feel afraid. What matters is how we choose to respond to that fear. Do we let it paralyze us, or do we use it as fuel to grow and overcome? Embracing vulnerability, acknowledging our fears without shame, is the first step towards conquering them. Challenge yourself to step outside of your comfort zone, to do one thing each day that scares you, even if it's just a little bit. Section 9. A life less fearful. Embracing the unknown. Life is inherently uncertain. We cannot control everything that happens to us. However, we can control how we respond to uncertainty, how we navigate the unknown. Choosing courage over comfort, embracing vulnerability, and challenging our fears allows us to live more fully and authentically. Remember, overcoming fear is not a destination, but a journey. There will be setbacks along the way, moments when fear threatens to pull us back into old patterns. But with each step forward, with each act of courage, we pave the way for a life less defined by fear and more guided by our values and aspirations. So, embrace the unknown.